I had no concept of the Old West. I mean, I studied, we learned all this in history class, but I think a lot of it was just watching television. We believed you guys were the cowboys that grew up in the 1880s and 1890s.
Well, we had to make you believe that, and we're glad that we could. There was so many fine westerns on the air at that time. In fact, one of the reasons we don't have any westerns anymore, in my opinion, is that we had so many of them that we ran out of stories. There's only just so many plots that you could use in a western, and after a while you've used them up, and you beat yourself coming back. So I think the overabundance of westerns kind of overexposed the genre, and it became something that people got tired of. And as the generations got younger, they had less and less connection to that period of time. So that's the reason for the diminishing number of westerns you see, and there aren't very many anymore. But there will always be westerns. I think westerns have been the backbone of the picture business since the Squaw Man, and I believe there'll always be people that will do westerns and fine westerns. There's always good ones coming out somewhere. So it's a great thing, and I'm glad to see it continuing in whatever form.
Well, I'd like to ask you now, because some of your fans, I'm sure, are aware of what you did, but you've done other work besides the westerns. But what was it that drew you to the western and made that your identifying part of the craft? Well,
it really didn't draw me. They put a gun in my hand and said, "Get on that horse and don't get down until after lunch." I was able to sit a horse pretty well and ride a horse anywhere I wanted to go, and I'd had quite a bit of experience. I was raised on some ranches in Oregon, and I'd had my own horse when I was 12 years old, and had him for many years, and took very good care of him, and he took very good care of me. So I really was had all the attributes and skills that were necessary to be in that position, and I just took to it like a duck takes to water. I had been trained as a Shakespearean actor and had a lot of classical experience on the stage, and had been working for years in that area. And when I got to Hollywood, I was 20 years old, and I had actually gone out there for a vacation and got a contract at MGM in 7 days after I got there. And that was the Cinderella story, and I was at MGM for a year and did 7 pictures while I was there. And my first film, Blackboard Jungle, I had the opportunity to get to know Glenn Ford, and he was very, very helpful and very kind and very influential in my career. And from there, I went to
Anne Francis. Anne Francis was in that one, wasn't she?
Oh yeah, she was in that one, and she was also in another film I made, which was Forbidden Planet, which was a.
I didn't know you were in that one.
Yeah, great movie.
Oh yeah,
Leslie Nielsen.
Myself and Robert Dix, Bob Dix, were killed by the Invisible Monster. We were the 2 crewmen that went out to shoot up the monster when he arrived, and he made short work of us and slapped us out into outer space. But where we were to begin with, but I mean even farther out, we were. Of course, the Invisible Monster took our lives, and then that became a catalyst for what happened in the rest of the film, and or one of the catalysts. And it was for its time, it was a breakthrough science fiction picture. I believe they spent $5 million on that picture in 1954, and that was a lot of money in those days.
Well, I loved Anne Francis. I love, especially that Virginian episode that you did in the 3rd season with her.
Oh yeah. Well, she's delightful and wonderful, and has been all her life, and still is. She's a great lady.
Yeah.
And we're glad to have her. We were glad to have her in any form on the Virginian, and of course her motion picture career was extensive and very, very great body of work that she's done. She's a marvelous actress. Glad to know her and glad to be her friend, I hope.
Oh, I'm certain you are. And, you mentioned luck, and the best definition of that I've heard is luck is when preparedness meets opportunity, and certainly you were. But, if you don't mind, I'd just like to get back to one thing, because you were mentioning that they put a gun in your hand and ask you to get on a horse and stay there and don't come down until after lunchtime. But now the horse that you rode on the show, that was not the same horse, obviously, that you owned as a child. But
oh, no.
Yeah. So what do you remember about your horse on that show?
Well, he was a great motion picture horse. A man named Del Combs owned him, and he brought him to me. We started the show with a big old sorrel horse who was a good-looking horse and a wonderful horse. He had a lot of performance horse training, and he was a great horse, but you couldn't get him to stand still. You'd run him uphill and down dale and into a shot where you're supposed to have some dialogue, and he wouldn't stand still, and you couldn't get the shot. So we very shortly brought in this other horse, and you could run him all day and bring him to a stop, and he would stay there. He would stand there until you told him to do something else. He was the most alert horse I ever knew. If I was talking to someone and his head was between us in the shot, you would see his ears go over to me when I said something, and his ears go over to the other actor when they replied. And it was a wonderful thing to animate the shot, and you can't train a horse to do that. He did it because he was so alert and interested in what everyone was saying.
That's interesting.
And what was going on around him. And
this was Joe D, right?
Yeah, Joe D, and we just called him Joe. And he was unique in that regard. I never saw a horse do that before or since. And I don't know how I got so lucky as to have that horse, but he carried me very well for the first 8 years, and then in the 9th year we changed horses, we changed costumes, and we changed the whole look of the show. And I had another Appaloosa horse named Sam, and he was a good horse, but he was never anything near as good as Jody. Jody was the best that you could ask for.
How many? Let's talk about you were under contract, and there was a time. I know not very many people have seen it, and I know a lot of people don't believe you that it even exists out there. But there really is a half-hour black and white pilot for the Virginian.
Yes, that's true, and that pilot was shot for an entirely different studio, for Columbia Studios Screen Gems, which was their television division. We made a pilot for the Virginian for a half-hour network show, and at that particular juncture was when the networks went from half-hour shows to hour shows that year, and we didn't make the cut. We couldn't sell it to a network because it was a half hour. I guess they didn't realize they could certainly expand it to an hour or an hour and a half, but it went by the boards, and it was a well-done show. It was a completely different take on the character, and a completely different set of costumes. He was kind of a southern dandy. He had lace cuffs and a lace shirt front and a tiny gun and a holster on his belt, you know. And when I say a tiny gun, a little tiny revolver they found somewhere, because I think at the time the network censors were trying to they were trying to downplay the violence of the Western at that time. There was a great hue and cry from numerous groups, including the PTA, about so much violence on television. Nowadays, there's far more violence, and it's comically ineffective. I've seen shots where there's guys on both sides firing automatic weapons, and there must be 4,000 rounds expended, and nobody even gets scratched. You know, they don't even get hit with a ricochet. So it's beyond my understanding why they do this and how they do this. But anyway, it's a tribute to the gang that couldn't shoot straight. And in a Western, when one of the Western heroes pulled his gun and shot at somebody, very generally the guy went down, and he had a reason to go down. He was a bad man and a bad villain, and we had to show the triumph of good over evil. Sure. And we did that once or twice, sometimes in a show, sometimes once or twice. Sometimes shows went by, we didn't do it at all. And still they complained that Westerns were too violent. But that was, I'm getting ahead of myself, that wasn't in the half-hour version. The half-hour version was not very violent at all.